Harald Hardrada, the Last Viking.
In the storm-lashed fjords of Norway, where the cold sea crashes against the granite cliffs, a legend was born in the year 1015. His name was Harald Sigurdsson, though history would remember him as Harald Hardrada, meaning Harold the Ruthless. A child of noble Viking blood, Harald's life began in fire and fury, as his half-brother King Olaf II struggled to unite Norway under one crown. When Olaf fell at the Battle of Stiklestad, 15-year-old Harald escaped death by fleeing into the wilderness, bloodied, exiled, and burning with revenge. Harald's exile would become a crucible. He crossed the mountains into Sweden, then journeyed east to the court of Kievan Rus. There, among the icy rivers and gold-domed cities of medieval Ukraine, he pledged his sword to Prince Yaroslav the Wise. The young Viking grew into a hardened warrior, mastering both diplomacy and war. But Harald's hunger for glory couldn't be satisfied in a foreign court. He had heard of a place where gold and blood flowed freely, the mighty Byzantine Empire. In Constantinople, Harald joined the famed Varangian Guard, an elite unit of Norsemen who protected the emperor himself. With his towering frame, golden hair, and fearless reputation, he rose quickly. He fought in Sicily, in the Holy Land, across the Mediterranean, becoming both a commander and a legend. The Byzantines called him Arialtes. He called it preparation. For while Harald crushed rebellions and seized fortresses, his mind remained fixed on one goal: reclaiming the throne of Norway. By the time Harald left Constantinople, wealthy beyond imagination, he had spent nearly a decade shaping himself into a warlord. He returned to Scandinavia not as a fugitive, but as a force of destiny. In 1046, he struck a deal with King Magnus the Good, his nephew, to share the rule with Norway. But Magnus died the next year, leaving Harald the undisputed king. He was no longer just a Viking. He was a monarch forged in the fires of three empires. As king, Harald ruled with iron will. He crushed dissent, centralized power, and imposed harsh laws. His enemies called him a tyrant, but to his followers, he was justice itself. He built churches, improved roads, and turned Norway into a more unified state. Yet the Viking in his blood never slept. Harald was a ruler, yes, but still, at heart, a raider, always hungry for conquest beyond the horizon. In 1066, Harald saw his chance. England, torn by succession after the death of Edward the Confessor, was vulnerable. Harald claimed the throne through an old agreement and set sail with a mighty fleet of over 300 longships. The sea churned with dragon-headed vessels, carrying warriors ready to carve history with axe and flame. It was to be the final Viking invasion, the last thunder of the north. Harald's forces landed in northern England and crushed resistance at the Battle of Fulford. Cities burned, banners fell, and the English trembled. But fate had already turned. King Harold Godwinson, freshly crowned, marched north with terrifying speed. On September 25 at Stamford Bridge, the two armies clashed in a brutal, legendary fight. Harald, fearless and in full armor, led from the front. According to sagas, Harald stood like a giant, striking down dozens before being pierced in the throat by an arrow. His fall marked not just the end of a battle, but the end of an era. The Viking Age, born in raids and runes, died with Harald Hardrada on English soil. A few days later, William the Conqueror would land in the south, changing England forever. But Harald's death silenced the thunder from the north. The survivors of Harald's army were allowed to return home with just 24 ships out of over 300. The Viking dream had shattered in blood and fire. Yet Harald's legend lived on, in sagas, in stone, in the hearts of those who remembered him not only as a king or a warrior, but as the last great Viking to walk the earth. Harald Hardrada's story is one of myth and memory, of a man who lived like a saga, wielding blade and crown with equal force. From the icy forests of Norway to the burning sands of the Mediterranean, he chased power across the known world. And in his final stand, he gave the Viking Age the ending it deserved. Not with quiet, but with war songs echoing into legend. Centuries after Harald's death, his name still echoed through the icy halls of the north. Skalds, Norse poets, and historians preserved his story in verse, portraying him as the ideal warrior king, fierce, wise, and destined. Unlike many rulers whose legacies dissolved into dust, Harald's legend hardened with time. His battles were recited like scripture, his reign seen as the last heartbeat of a fading pagan world. Even in the Christianized kingdoms that followed, Harald could not be erased. Churches stood where once he had ruled by the sword, but within their walls, whispers of the old Viking spirit lingered. He was painted by some as a tyrant, by others as a lawgiver, but all agreed Harald had been larger than life, the brutal king who had sung poetry, slain emperors, and carved his name into history. Modern historians view Harald as more than a warrior. He was a bridge between the pagan Viking world and the rising tide of centralized Christian monarchies. His reign marked the end of tribal raids and the dawn of statehood. It was Harald who turned war bands into armies and loyalty from clan-based to national. He unified not just land, but identity. Harald's journeys were unmatched. Few men in the 11th century had traveled as far. Norway, Kiev and Rus, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Sicily, England. In each place he left behind traces, in blood, in gold, in whispers. To the Byzantines he was Oreltes the Bold, to the English a thunderstorm from the north, to his own people a king who defied mortality. In literature and art, Harald became the ultimate symbol of the fading warrior ideal. He was strength tempered with strategy, brutality shaped by vision. In the Icelandic sagas, he sings verses on the eve of battle, composes poems to lost lovers, and walks calmly into death. He wasn't just a man of war, he was war incarnate. The Battle of Stamford Bridge is often seen as a turning point, not only for England, but for all of Europe. After Harald's defeat, a Viking threat to Western Europe all but ended. In a strange twist of fate, his death cleared the path for William the Conqueror's rise, changing English history forever. Harald's fall was the final toll of an age-old bell. In Norway, his memory never truly died. His life was studied in schools, his poems recited in classrooms, his image carved into wood and steel. Even in the age of industry and democracy, the last Viking stood tall as a symbol of courage, ambition, and refusal to bow. To this day, statues of Harald greet travelers in Oslo, still watching, still waiting. With modern DNA studies and archaeological digs, traces of Harald's world are emerging from the soil. Grave sites, weapons, and ship burials continue to reveal the magnitude of his era. Historians and enthusiasts alike chase after fragments of his reign, desperate to understand how one man embodied the violent poetry of the Viking soul. Documentaries, films, and novels have reimagined Harald in various forms: a villain, a hero, a lover, a monster. But all agree on one thing: he belonged to a different world. In an age driven by machines and algorithms, Harald represents something lost: raw human will, the roar of oars in a storm, the gleam of steel at sunrise. Harald Hardrada died on a muddy field far from home, but his legacy sails on like the longships of his youth.